Hi, welcome everyone to our afternoon sessions. We will now begin with panel 2, the arts as a strategy, paying attention to the other. So, Professor Rui Carvalho Homem, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to chair this second panel of the University and Culture European Summit. Now, as you know, in this panel, entitled The Arts as Strategy, Paying Attention to the Other, we'll be focusing on how the arts, taken in as broad a sense as possible, can help delineate identities and contribute to a richer understanding of human diversity. And for that, we've gathered a very rich gallery of contributors from different backgrounds, academics, artists, and writers, but also, for example, experts in intercultural networking, for example, at the level of student organizations. Now, our panelists have generously agreed to offer short and focused contributions in response to some of those key questions that were proposed to them and bring out their viewpoints sharply and concisely. My own role as chair will be discreet. I'll be introducing each speaker very briefly, since their bio notes are available on the website, in the order in which they feature in the program, and I will act as timekeeper and moderator as unobtrusively as possible. All right, so we're beginning with Richard Carney, who is Charles Sildig Professor in Philosophy at Boston College. He's taught also at University College Dublin, the Sorbonne, University of Nice, also in Australia. He is the author of, many books, literally a few dozen books, including monographs and edited collections on European philosophy and literature. And he is also a published novelist and poet. He was formerly a member of the Arts Council of Ireland. He is a member of the Royal Irish Academy and of other distinguished institutions. Richard, thank you so much for joining us on this panel. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, and a pleasure to be here and an honor. I'd like to begin with a quotation from my own professor of philosophy when I was a doctoral student in Paris in the late 1970s, Paul Ricoeur, who gave a wonderful lecture subsequently published called Reflections on a New Ethos for Europe. And in that wonderful essay lecture, he writes that narrative hospitality means taking responsibility in imagination and in sympathy for the story of the other through the life narratives which concern the other. And he goes on there to talk about the importance for Europe of exchanging our stories, our creative stories, our poetic stories, our epic stories that founded the different nations and peoples of Europe, but also exchanging our wounds. That this was very important, the exchange of memories. And out of this, he said, will come not only a sense of narrative identity, somebody asks you who you are, you respond by telling your story, but also a profound sense of narrative plurality, that we have a multiplicity of identities, and it's through the exchange of these stories that we can develop a genuine European civilization and community. One of Ricoeur's favorite philosophers, and mine too, was Simone Weil, who in her book, The Iliad, talks about Europe in Greek civilization beginning with an act of hospitality. And she names two in that famous epic of Homer's, when Daimonides and Glaucon, instead of repeating the endless revenge cycles of their respective tribes, throw away their arms and extend their hands, their open palms to each other in a handshake. The other moment is when Priam goes to beg Achilles for the body of his son Hector, who has been killed by Achilles. And she says, in these stories, we find the beginnings of civilization in the handshake, in the act of forgiveness, in the act of reconciliation. And she goes further in saying that literature itself, the arts themselves, create a moment of peace. She actually calls it peace, an interruption in our daily lives of competition and friction and belligerence, to actually pause, to step back. And she calls this rupture the beginnings of peace. So both in terms of substance, content, and in terms of form, the arts can, she argued, bring peace. James Joyce, my compatriot from Ireland, traveled throughout Europe. He lived in Trieste, he lived in Paris, he lived in Zurich, and so on. And he wrote his book, Ulysses, as, of course, a modern parody of the great Greek European epic. But in it, what he wanted to do was to portray Ulysses as a Jew, Bloom. And at one point in the novel, you have Molly saying, Jew Greek is Greek Jew. And this for Joyce was the possibility of coexistence, the Jew and the Greek, Athens and Jerusalem, coming together in a sort of playful communion. And he did describe his goal in writing Ulysses as an Irishman on the margins of Europe, as his attempt to Europeanize Ireland and Hibernicize Europe. In Finnegan's Wake, his last great book, he talked about literature and the arts inviting us to live between two twinsome minds. Now, even in English, that's a playful coinage, but between two twinsome minds. So we're always between two opposites. There's another famous Irish poet, Seamus Heaney, Nobel Prize laureate indeed, said, living in Northern Ireland, where he grew up between, nationalist and unionist, British and Irish, Protestant and Catholic, loyalist and Republican, he said, 2 buckets were easier carried than one. I grew up in between. He was a farm boy. And as we all know, balancing between 2 buckets is easier than just having one. And that's basically the argument, that we are better off living in the in-between. So Emmanuel Levinas, another philosopher I worked with many years ago, Lithuanian Jewish philosopher, he said that God created the earth because he was bored and he wanted to have 2. On s'amuse mieux à 2. So he created the human, to have somebody to talk to. And maybe that's what basically civilization is about. 2 is better than 1. We is better than I, if we can live creatively in between. So I don't know how I am for time, but I'm happy to wrap up by simply saying that the origin of the word hospitality and narrative hospitality is the Latin word hostis, which can mean either a guest or an enemy. And it seems to me that the arts are a way of turning the other as hostis, enemy, into the hostis, hospes, as friend. And if we look at the great narratives of our European civilization and Western civilization generally, they are ones of hospitality that are always open to the other and the stranger. Think of Abraham receiving the strangers at Mamre. Think of Jacob wrestling with the stranger God at night. Think of Mary receiving the angel stranger in Nazareth. That's in the Judeo-Christian community, and I mentioned the Greeks already in the Iliad. Receiving the stranger is the first act of civilization. So I think I'll end there and pass on to my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for this very inspiring plea for in-betweenness, for the creative potential of liminality, a plea grounded in philosophy and literature from Ricoeur to Joyce and Seamus Heaney. We'll see at the end of the panel to what extent we'll still have some minutes, to discuss some of the insights arising from your contributions. We'll see. But for now, we'll proceed immediately to our second speaker, and that's Madalena Vitorino, who works as a choreographer and dance pedagogue, deeply engaged in community arts and in theater. She's also been active in cultural programming and teaching, both in the framework of state institutions and of Forum Dança, a cultural non-profit organization that promotes dance. Her international experience has also included festivals such as the Galway Arts Festival in Ireland and the Freya Festival in Aarhus, Denmark. Madalena, please, we'll be delighted to hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. As a choreographer, I am interested in bodies and how they move me, as Pina Bausch once said. How each body carries physical, emotional, and intellectual intelligence. And what can the body say while it moves or poses? What information outside the constraints of words can it communicate, evoke, clarify, or disturb? The dance as we see it today, it's a potential field of permanent research for an understanding, a projection of ourselves in relation with the other and with the world we live in. In fact, it is a very complete field of research because it is based on the full presence of the person, on its light, its mind, its perspiration, its heartbeat, and its blood. Through its physical approach towards inquiry, dance uses its universal quality. Merce Cunningham, a very important American choreographer, said that the dance is only made of our arms and legs and what they can and cannot do. Dance can exist on its own right and needs to be more widely understood. We need to understand that this universal language of the body can unite rather than divide. Through the dance, the body transcends itself. To dance is to flood ideas from within that have physical, energetic configuration. Through a process of decontextualization of the common movement, we may find other spheres of movement meaning. The thinking body, portrayed in much of the experimental contemporary approach to dance making, gives us the chance to be improvising and dancing to an audience at the same time. Or to see how the spine, for example, as Steve Paxton, another very important American choreographer, has showed us in his view on the role of the spine in our moving lives, that connects everything we do, everything we think, everything we feel. Connections between reason, feeling, and doing can be explored and related. Dance is the field of research that looks upon human movement as a universal language, but full of subtleties and differences, individual, social, cultural, ethical, and political differences. To dance is human, say the anthropologists. Dance has always been a field where human borders can more easily be crossed, as the communication transcends the wording, because it is bodily communication, a language that embraces diversity in its most deepest way. As a choreographer myself, I have developed with collaborative, participative practices many dances that involve artists, art students, university students in an artistic engagement with common people from all backgrounds and origins. Prisoners, children, elderly, African, Asian communities, university professors, people who live in the margin of society, blind people, very sick people, healthy people from different cultures, countries, and social and economic backgrounds, farmers, industrial workers. A work built with artists with trained bodies in dancing, and a work built with people in trained bodies in life experience. Here, virtuosism, high qualification, talent, and creativity are present in a wide scope of possibilities. Our diversity is crucial. It nurtures the depth of our development. Diversity becomes the positive issue that allows my works to be moving, to be complex, to be rich and mysterious. The exposure of university students to contemporary, experimental, innovative artistic practices and narratives is highly important and desirable. We all agree on that. My invitation is to consider that dance will not be falling out or falling behind music, theater, literature, or the fine arts. But more than the possibility to attend performances, go to exhibitions, see cinema in the wide screen and in the dark, the university as an entity should host artistic projects that could transform the physical relationship students have with the universitarian atmosphere and learn from other different perspectives. Artists may enter the classrooms. Laboratories of art making can connect to theoretical subject matters in many ways. Residencies of artists or companies who can enter into dialogue with subject matters that develop fields of work where the borders of learning fade away to become spaces of discovery and of thought-producing mechanisms. Putting professors, students, and artists in a strong engagement, this encompasses a change on the way we look at the university as a whole. The universities should be also interested in knowing more about practices, projects in their surroundings, in their cities, or even in other countries, and develop national and international strategies of contact to promote immersive opportunities for students to plunge, to put their hands on, get profoundly in touch by the opportunity of engaging physically, practically, intellectually in artistic practices and examples which blend art with life. They do exist, these projects, in many countries, in India, in Portugal, in Sweden, for example. The connection between the subjects the students follow at university level and the cultural artistic experiences that we can promote do not need, however, to be direct or primary. What matters is to create some kind of circuit that shakes and connects forever the students towards their inner curiosity, their unique creativity, and openness to the unknown. In that contact, if it is profound, the student will be touched and changed. Formal strategies are necessary, of course, to reach out to cultural institutions, but informal approaches towards poly-centered approaches to art making and culture construction in the real field of life are also vital, and in my opinion, enough attention has not been given to that dimension yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madalena, for inspiring us with this yearning for, in your words, a universal language of the body, this yearning for full presence. Also, this tension, I suppose, between, on the one hand, claims for universality, and on the other, the particularities that also very much realize the human that is so strongly defined as well by difference. All right, let's proceed with this panel. Now, our next speaker is Adessa Zadia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who is currently Culture and Education Policy Assistant at the Erasmus Student Network in Brussels, Belgium. Prior to that, she was also Education Officer and then Local Vice President for the Greek Erasmus Network. And she worked for a while on internships teaching in Italy and also in Greece. Adessa, delighted to have you on board. You're very much welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very delighted to be in this panel discussion and to bring the perspective of young people and the Erasmus generation, as we call it, which are the young people that enjoy the practical benefits of European integration. They're highly mobile and they consider themselves citizens of the world. And I would like to start this my intervention with the cultural policy in general. And I would like to say that we talk about cultural policy, and usually we talk about management of arts, of promotion of national heritage, but I think it's imperative to also bring the policy making into perspective, and the goal of cultural diversity and enabling different cultures to coexist and work together through cultural policies in general. And now more than ever, it's a very useful tool to address global challenges, sustainability, and to generate intercultural dialogues and successful programs that have achieved that in higher education and not only. And I cannot not mention one of the most successful programs that have achieved that in higher education, and this is the Erasmus Plus program. And you can see the significance of this program in the new European education area, and we have already witnessed how useful tool is to harness and the full potential of education and culture. It raises awareness of cultural heritage, can create a more inclusive Europe, and bring access for all and international cooperation. And while it is an important
Odessa, there seems to be a problem with your internet connection. We can't hear you right now. Let's hope this will improve. I think we've lost Odessa. I suggest that we wait just for a few seconds. Yeah, she's joining again. Ah, Odessa, you're back.
Oh, I'm very sorry for
Great.
my
That's
connection
okay.
problems.
Go ahead, please.
What?
No, I was just saying, please go ahead. Yes, glad
thank
you're
you.
back.
Okay, I'm very sorry for this. I can continue then. So I was talking about the Erasmus Plus program and the big impact that it has created. And while it is very important for the intercultural growth, it also presents some challenges for students when they try to explore and adapt to the new culture. And there should be opportunities for them to observe, comprehend, and engage in exploring these new cultures and explore this curiosity and eagerness to seek to go beyond the obvious. And to listen to other people's stories and develop empathy for their stories. And being exposed to these new cultures makes them realize not only aspects of their own cultures, but also of their own cultures, because they can compare the unfamiliar with the familiar one and realize parts of their identity. And this gives them the opportunity to reflect later and engage in conscious comparisons about their values, their attitudes, and realize how they can construct new ones. We should allow these students to reflect on these experiences. And it's very important to, when this experience ends, that they don't stop there. It is important that they make sure that after this experience of living life on another culture's terms, one takes both of the new knowledge and exploration skills in order to integrate them later in their life ahead. And of course, the best way to develop attitudes and to be open and acquire knowledge is by experiencing it. Experience how people act and communicate with each other from their perspective. And yeah, and it's not always accessible for everyone actually to participate in different programs that allow them to engage in these experiences. While there are students in Europe that have been mobile through various programs of Erasmus Plus, there are still problems and of accessibility and inclusion of many different groups that can participate in these kind of programs. And there is a growing demand for the recognition of, as it is called, internalization at home, which includes internationalizing the curriculum, the teaching and learning, the learning outcomes, and thrive for global citizenship development. The goal is to be to create a more holistic strategy ultimately and strengthen the inclusiveness of the European higher education systems for all. And it's very important to strengthen the dialogue between universities, policymakers, public authorities, stakeholder organizations, and youth organizations that are active on behalf of the underrepresented and disadvantaged groups in order to raise awareness on topics of inclusion, equity, and diversity, and view this not as a challenge, but as a quality prerequisite for higher education institutes. And access to culture is another issue that really needs to be tackled, because culture should be a distinctive feature of a community and of more audiences, and it can benefit everyone. And there should be constructive dialogue that brings together key actors and stakeholders that plan strategic approaches to develop sustainable policies related to youth access to culture, and which includes information provision, communication, new environments, etc., and so forth. And we need to include organizations that represent people with limited access culture in policy-making processes and listen to their needs and the information that they try to communicate and translate that in policy and actions. And another thing is equal opportunities inside higher education. Higher education institutions must be open to all students from regardless their ethnic or cultural origin. We need to ensure that all students have access and opportunities within higher education, assuming that their individual competencies and desire to learn and to progress is there is a safe space to develop that. And regardless of the growing multiculturality in Europe, there is this need for more strategies like these and actions to foster understanding and respect for cultural diversity and to develop intercultural skills. It's not enough to be open and inclusive. We need to be actively anti-discriminatory and apply concrete practices against racism and inequalities. And cultural expression and active involvement prepares young people for critical thinking and other necessary elements for their future learning. And it enables young people to develop skills and competencies to be actors of democracy and integrate into society. And these people, the young people, the next generation, will be the ones that will play an active role in both civil society and labor market later, and thus become the ones that will actively tackle inequality and take steps towards sustainable development in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adessa, for reminding us indeed of the huge gains brought by programs such as Erasmus and Erasmus Plus towards our understanding of the pluralities and diversities that make up the human. Indeed, there is a very good argument for pointing towards such programs as decisive factors towards European integration in the decades, that process has already included. And I remember recently how people were indeed mourning the disappearance of these opportunities from certain environments within European territories brought, for example, by the Brexit process. But I don't want to introduce this polemical note into this summit, into this European Summit on University and Culture. So thanks again, Adessa, and we'll proceed to our next speaker, my colleague and friend Ana Luísa Amaral, a much admired prize-winning poet whose work has been published in a variety of countries and languages, who has also been an object of sustained critical attention nationally and internationally, who is a translator of Shakespeare, John Updike, Louis Gluck, and an essayist. As an academic, Ana Luísa, years ago, retired from teaching, but not from research, fortunately, where she has continued her long-standing commitment to comparative poetics, feminist, and queer studies. Thank you very much, Ana Luísa, for having accepted the invitation, and go ahead. We'll be delighted to hear you.
Thank you very much, Rui, and thank you very much for this opportunity. It is a pleasure, it is an honor to be here in this panel. I have a small text. Many years ago, a colleague of mine from anthropology told me that one of the landmarks in the evolution of our species was the moment when we started to leave flowers on the graves of our dead. The flowers were useless from a pragmatic point of view, yet they fulfilled the fundamental need, the one of remembering, of keeping alive, even if it were for a short period of time, the memory of the other. Therefore, the function of those flowers was, just like the one of art, symbolic, apparently useless, and for that very reason, absolutely relevant, what makes us humans and allows us to relate to others, merging past and present. Remembering is an ethical act, has an ethical value, and bears an intimate relation with art in its different forms. In Frames of War, When Is Life Grievable, Judith Butler gave the example of the Guantanamo prisoners whose poems were either smuggled or literally engraved in polystyrene cups that passed from hand to hand. The poems of those prisoners, the ones that represent the figure of the destitute from political rights, were the marks of the written word that helped breaking the precarious chains of solitude. In fact, neither does the body exist in a vacuum, nor are its borders fully stable. The body is contiguous to everything, be it the other's bodies or every living body that constitutes the world, no exception made to planets, stars, galaxies, or subatomic particles. And just in some way that my body is matter, so is the body of the other, and it matters, just like mine. Born from an inner urgency, art comes to life in the most intimate of relationships, the one of the self with the self. Yet, after the poem is written, the music composed, the painting finished, the installation ready, the creation for the choreography idealized, we need to turn to the other. We need to share. In this second movement, art is always communication, and then it belongs to the world and to its time. In the case of poetry, a kind of grammar working with rules and norms of a given context, it is concomitantly something that may cross times, becoming in a way timeless. Art, and in my case, the art of poetry, was never divorced from the world. Being the very space of possibility, a language of intensities in itself, poetry can function as a tool for resisting our globalized world, where differences appear to be neutralized, but where inequalities have grown appallingly wider. Heir of times, a depository of memories, poetry deals with ways of taking root in a world to which we all arrive as strangers, but that we inhabit unequally. What kind of times are these? Is the question the American poet Adrienne Rich, to whom I shall return in the end, chooses for the title of her poem, written already in the 21st century, that speaks about a secret place, a place between two stands of trees where the grass grows uphill. I won't tell you where the place is, says the poet, the dark mesh of the woods meeting the unmarked strip of light, ghost-ridden crossroads, leaf-mold paradise. I know already who wants to buy it, sell it, make it disappear. And I won't tell you where it is, so why do I tell you anything? Because you still listen, because in times like these, to have you listen at all, it's necessary to talk about trees. It is necessary to talk about trees indeed, even in times like these, or because of times like these, characterized by excess of weapons of mass destruction, of consumption, of information, images that replace reality, and also another kind of excess, the excess of absence, equivalent to hunger, deprivation, void. Those two types of excess live side by side without actually cohabiting. They usually do not intercross unless in a virtual way. When they cross each other's path, when the world of the human abuse for having been born a female, of the immigrant drowned because he or she was flying from hunger, of the boy killed because he was gay, when the world of the one who either has no voice or lives in the margins of the dominant ideology intercrosses with the world of rampant consumption and untrammed capitalism, then the discomfort to which we turn away and the destruction we call vandalism are born. This is where civic obligation cannot be disconnected from poetic insurrection. Higher education has to take all this into account, and this is why I believe it is so necessary to create courses such as gender studies or feminist studies, or courses which comprehend in their syllabi the issues of gender, sexualities, race, class, all the categories that have been used as source of disparities and violence. For it is about dominant ideologies that we talk about, either we speak of life or art. To use these lenses in our studies in order to analyze the structures of privileges and oppressions is to invite students to pay attention to the other and to the world. It is a way of bringing into the classroom what we usually leave outside the classroom, affections, that which count in the definition of the human and puts everything back in place, organizing the personal inner life and building relations among people. One of today's biggest threats might rest upon these, in collaborating with those whose rules rest on reducing the world and our relation with the world and with others. On the other hand, the joy found in not giving in resisting, expands thoughts and emotions, is a keystone for sharing at the same time indignation and the surprise of the unexpected. Poetry, capable as it is to build words within it, can be an acute mechanism for enhancing human strength. Thus, the beautiful question in William Blake's Auguries of Innocence, can I see another's woe and not be in sorrow too? Or his famous lines, "Some are born to sweet delight, some are born to endless night," can be read as a way to denounce that the absence of love and solidarity is what corresponds, in fact, to true abomination. For it was about the world and the other throughout times, not only about the cruelties of East England of the late 18th century that William Blake was talking about. I believe that art can reinforce an ethics of care and a poetics of affection because it feeds on memory transfusions which can produce in us both emotion and locomotion, which move us in the double sense of the word. I conclude with two quotes. In the first century before Christ, the Jewish religious leader, and scholar Hillel the elder wrote, and I quote, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" 40 years ago, in the 1980s, Adrian Rich added, "If not with the others, how?" Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ana Luisa, for reminding us of the elements of coextension between, in your words, civic obligation and poetic insurrection. Also for pointing towards the importance of commemorative designs for confirming us personally and collectively in our relationship to community and place. Thank you again, and we'll proceed now. Our next speaker will be Nuno Cardoso. Nuno Cardoso is an actor and stage director, currently the artistic director of the São João National Theatre here in Porto. He has directed productions of such diverse authors as Shakespeare, Büchner, Chekhov, Gorky, Lars Moran, and he was a co-founder of an artistic collective, Visões Úteis, Useful Visions. His work has also included social concerns. He has, for example, cooperated with youth organizations in socially deprived areas. And prior to all of this, he got himself a degree in law, which I think can sometimes also prove useful in all sorts of contexts. Nuno Cardoso, thank you for joining us. Please go ahead. We'll be delighted to hear you.
Hello. In 2001, I was working in a prison doing Orestia with the prisoners, and someone told me that I was engaging with the other. So for the next 20 years, I've been working at the same time in mainstream theaters, but at the same time, I've been working with elderly people, with people that come from Africa, with thieves, with lots of stuff. Then I became artistic director of a national theater. And the main issue was, how can I, as an artistic director of an institution that is mainstream, can connect and open the theater to the city? And in doing this with my partner in crime, Pedro Sobrado, we built up a program that reinforces the educational center, creating theater clubs, creating a program called Neighborhoods that engages with the neighborhoods of our theaters, creating a program called Visitations that engages with all the schools around our region, and opening up the theater. For this project, I wrote a text, and I'll share it with you, and it will be my contribution. Theater can be declined in many ways. It lives in the world as much as within us. It lives in the word as much as in the body. It can be said in a particular language. It can be felt without any particular language. And therein lies the rub. When we strive to say what theater is, and therefore what theaters do. Is it a mixture of languages? Is it the convergence of expressive forms? Is it the moment of shared experience? Yes, and then some. Theater is not easily put. Theater is humankind, plain and simple, paragraph and stop. Not because it's a quintessential process of invention, research, construction, or a relationship, in which the theater knows and society learns, but precisely because of the opposite. The methods, times, and ways of artistic creation aren't a foreclosed awareness or knowledge. They rely most of the time on experience and chance. And society doesn't really need them to learn and create its inevitable path towards the future. It actually keeps forgetting the theater, and we must remind it. If we come to the understanding that in this city of Babel, we desperately try to strive for survival and meaning, the shortest path between 2 points is to create a link between culture and development as a significant tool in the strategic definition of policies all over the city, all over the country, all over the Europe. Culture as a center for the construction of identities and a privileged space for activation of citizenship and social inclusion. Culture as an element of the process of appropriation of a shifting reality where the interpretation of the world becomes training, leisure, enjoyment, and fusion of horizons. Then we must arrive to the inevitable conclusion that theater is the first stepping stone of a community, of the relation between citizens. It's the central idea of the city itself. Theater must become the harbinger of peace. Theater and society are the odd couple, the equation that brings unity through a shared ordeal where word, gesture, body, sight, hearing sew a sinuous embroidery that creates the world and the many-faced city. Teatrum mundum, an infinite and never-ending effort to grasp mankind at any time in any shape. Theater provokes a space of reflection, encounters, sharing, seduction. It seeks, it provokes a space for reaction and interaction. It allows that which helps each one of us become what we are and does not aim for each person to continue as they were. It strives to understand oneself and the other. Theater provokes the necessary uneasiness of living. The fragility of the social, cultural, and economic experiment that we live in, the growth of politics of fear and hostility that shows in the underbelly of our city, riddled with hostility, fractured by issues such as gender, migration, welfare, identity, environment, wealth. The politics of populism that twist common sense and oppose it to good sense. The strategy of media overdose as the way to drown opinion. The tactics of fake to not confront the truth. The loss of purpose makes theater a laboratory for discussion of political or social agendas of our communities. Makes theater the main stage for everybody, not one nor the other, but everybody through a discussion, through a creation of a partnership. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nuno Cardoso. Indeed, I mean, how to meet the expectations proper to a theatre existing in a certain institutional framework and the demands and responsibilities of community. I suppose what you were telling us about also reflects the cogency of something that Raymond Williams, the founding father of cultural studies, was arguing a few decades ago when he rather resonantly claimed that theatre is the most social of all art forms. Thank you very much. Now, we'll proceed to a final, indeed double segment in this panel that will be the joint responsibility of three of our panelists. So I'll be introducing the three together, and then they will manage the internal economy of their double slot, okay? And the three panelists are Alfredo Haar, an artist, architect, and filmmaker who lives and works in New York. His work has been shown extensively and features in major museums around the world. He is a regular participant in the Biennales of Venice and São Paulo, as well as Documenta in Kassel. More than 60 books have been published on his work, and he regularly addresses audiences, well, like us, at a variety of international venues. Then Susan Meiselers, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who is a documentary photographer who lives and works in New York, the author and editor of a number of books and collections, also a film director. She has been the object of major exhibitions in Europe and US and is well known for her focus, in particular, on the insurrection in Nicaragua and more broadly, human rights issues in Latin America. She's been the president of the Magnum Foundation since it was created in 2007. And Lydia Matthews, a critical writer, contemporary art curator, educator, and cultural activist. She has an extensive academic track record, also in creating new academic programs. She is currently a professor of visual culture in the Fine Arts program of Parsons School of Design and the director of the Curatorial Design Research Lab at the New School. She has curated exhibitions at a great number of venues around the world, and she has been the recipient of prizes, grants, and fellowships. Thanks to the three of you for organizing, as I was saying, this final double slot in this panel. And well, the floor is yours collectively. I'm not sure who will begin, whether it will be Alfredo as in the program.
No, it will be me.
All right, Lydia, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation to be a participant in this very important conversation today. It's truly an honor to be invited to serve as a curator within Kiklo's 2021 Photo Biennale in Porto that will open on May 14th. As a dual citizen of both the United States and Greece, I definitely live in the in-between that Professor Kearney was describing. And I often think about the relationship between the academic and cultural discourses that are actively being shaped in the United States and how those do and do not translate into a European context and vice versa. Right now in New York, there is a very lively debate about how to critique past histories in an effort to address the ways that unjust systems have excluded many women, many people of color, and non-gender conforming groups from participating fully in the public sphere. Cultural and educational institutions are engaged in complex discussions, which are often very uncomfortable, about how to decolonize our curriculum, diversify our communities and our artistic programs so that other cultural voices who've been ignored or repressed may be seen and heard. So when Virgilio Ferreira invited me to curate a section of the Porto Photo Biennale, these were the questions and the urgent, oh dear, let me turn this off. So sorry. Technology connected. So when he invited me to do this project here in Porto, these were the conversations that were very urgent in my mind. And I saw this as an opportunity to learn more about the colonial legacy of Portugal and how that impacts people, people's daily lives and quotidian experiences, both back in the former colonies and as well here in the city of Porto. So this question led me to the two artists who you will hear from today, who I selected to work with in this context, Alfredo Jar and Susan Meiselus, both of whom I deeply admire for their long and illustrious careers working on social justice issues. Their work has helped to redefine how to practice photography and filmmaking with a keen sense of social inclusion and ethics. In their previous works, they have in fact researched and represented aspects of Portugal's colonial past. So I'm going to pass the proverbial microphone, such as it is here in Zoom, to Alfredo, to both of them, to tell you a little bit about how they work and the pieces that you will encounter in this year's Photo Biennale. So Alfredo, I'm going to pass it to you to begin, please.
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you for everyone for being here. And I'm honored to be among you, such a distinguished group of intellectuals. 5 minutes is a very little amount of time to respond to what I've heard, but I would like to make a few comments before talking about the work I will present at the Photo Biennial When Professor Richard Kearney mentioned that Simone Weil talked about hospitality as the origin of civilization, I felt that was a very beautiful thought, but it has been contrary to what has been happening in the last 2 centuries, unfortunately. And I would argue that it's exactly the contrary of hospitality that has marked the last 200 years. Right now, we have seen we are suffering the fact of 75 million refugees around the world. And in the last 5 years, as you know, we have experienced a world immigration crisis. And Europe has panicked in the face of 1 million Syrian immigrants trying to enter the continent. While Lebanon had welcomed 2 million Syrians, while Turkey had welcomed 3 million Syrians, and Jordan had welcomed 1 million Syrians. Europe, the entire continent, was panicking because 1 million Syrians were trying to enter the continent. That is not hospitality, Dr. Richard Kearney. Another thing I would like to respond to is to Adessa Sadia with her hopeful statements about Erasmus. As we know, one of the first consequences of Brexit has been the cancellation of Erasmus. So these are the things that are happening. And as an artist, I respond to context. That's what I do. I'm an architect that makes art. And for an architect that makes art, context is everything. So I would like to salute the words of Professor Ana Luisa Amadal, who believes in poetry, who believes in art and culture and its capacity to affect change. And I believe, like her and like Nuno Cardoso, that artists create models of thinking the world. And perhaps I also believe that the art world and the world of culture is, I insist, perhaps the last remaining space of freedom. And this is where we can act in total freedom so far. So these are just some spontaneous reactions to what I've heard at the beginning of this panel. And regarding the work I will be showing at this photo biennial, sharing the stage with Susan and at the invitation of Lydia, it's a film I did in Angola called Mushima. Mushima means heart in Kimbundu, which is the original language of Angola. And the origin of this film is that I have been collecting contemporary African music for the last 30 years. But I'm particularly interested in the music from Angola, Mozambique, and Cabo Verde. In other words, the music that has this Portuguese influence. It's the music that convey what the Portuguese and what the Cabo Verdeans and Mozambicans talk about saudade. This concept of saudade has always been very close to my heart. This combination of mourning and joy at the same time, which for me reflects what life is about. And so that's why I've collected this kind of music. And one day I was organizing my music collection, and I discovered that I had 6 versions of the same song called Mushima. And I realized that this song, the recordings I had, were done from 1956 to the late 90s. And so I put them all together in a kind of playlist, and I started listening to these 6 versions of Mushima. And I realized that I was being told the history of Angola just by listening 6 different interpretations of the same song. And so I decided to create an homage to Angola through this song. And I built a little film in 10 cantos where we played these different interpretations of the songs and tell the story of Angola. Now, this song was written in 1956 by Liceo Vieira Dias, who founded a band called Angola Ritmos. And this band was born to assert Angolan identity during the brutal colonial power of Portugal. At the time, as you know, even carnival was forbidden because of the colonial power of Portugal. And so this band was born to assert this identity. And Liceo Viela Dias, besides being the founder of this band, Angola Ritmos, was also a founding member of the MPLA, El Movimiento para la Liberación de Angola. So for him and for this band, of course, music was a way to assert their identity and to exist in the world of the colonial power of Portugal. I'm going to share with you just 1 minute of the film, just as an excuse to make you listen to that song. Obviously, this was just a teaser. I hope that will make you want to see the entire film. Basically, in this film that is divided in 10 short cantos, I tried to tell the story of Angola and to show how the effect of colonialism left the country in a certain state and how the country is emerging with its own identity. And each canto is a statement about Angolan identity. I would like to finish by suggest that I strongly believe that culture can affect change. And this is where we are now. And we have an opportunity in this COVID era to affect change within the world of culture. I'll pass now the Zoom microphone to my friend Susan.
Thank you, Alfredo. That was so moving. I want to see it again. I haven't seen the film in a long time. But I think we share this hope that culture, in fact, can change. Us, the other, all of us together. I'm going to try to bridge quickly and hope that my screen comes forward. Oops. Sorry. We've had this all worked out and it now just didn't work. 1 second.
Well, it did work. You were sharing screen. I'm just not sure whether it was what you wanted to share, but certainly did that.
That's the question. It's not. It's hold on a second and it will be.
Yeah.
So where to begin on a short visit to a very complex process? I'm going to just dive in quickly. My practice as a photographer is a combination of making images or frames and frameworks of inclusion that I create as a kind of dialogical approach. I think of my body carrying, much as we were just hearing, this history as a kind of archive. So if I go back to Portugal, or as I will come someday to Portugal again, it began, my first trip was in 2004. It was shaped by two invitations, one which was an open commission to do a project anywhere in Portugal, and the second came from a small brochure found at the Office of SOS Racism, where I read about a community that was inviting strangers to tour their neighborhood. So I went as a tourist and connected that day with the Youth Association, and from then on, my time in Cova da Moura evolved. Walking each day, wandering with no planned route, intuitively making pictures of those incidental encounters. Slowly, as I began to meet people, I gave them a signed Polaroid picture as a kind of acknowledgement of that moment we shared as a trace of our crossing and gesture towards our connection. A few months later, I returned, and alongside making my own pictures, I proposed to do a workshop with the teens, encouraging them to engage and document their own daily lives. My multi-week project led to two shows, one on the walls of the Belém Cultural Center in downtown Lisbon, where only a few of the Cova community felt comfortable visiting. The more important one, the other one, held simultaneously with my portraits of many I had met, hanging from the laundry lines in front of their homes in Cova. We arranged a special art tour, and each guest visiting from Lisbon was given a map and guided by the teens through the maze of narrow streets. There in the very center, surprise, was a space of discovery. The pictures made by their teen guides, a representation of the community by and for the community, bringing them closer by crossing the boundaries that had divided them. So now to shift to the great challenge in Porto during COVID. It begins with a question: what can I contribute as a documentary photographer when not on the ground with a camera? Is a socially distanced relationship even possible? Our process began through Zoom with an introduction to three important potential partners in an experimental collaboration. The sociologist Ligia Ferro from the University of Porto, her thesis student Beatriz Lezardo, and a former student and artist, Dori Negro. Initially, we began with research via the internet, with the understanding that unlike Cova da Moura, where the Cape Verdean community was centered in one neighborhood, we learned from Ligia and others that in Porto, the Afro-descendant community was dispersed through the city and thus seemingly invisible. The internet could only just look in from the outside. But that online research started us wondering what other places were meaningful to the community. Dori suggested we first visit an elder, Doña Claudia, who for decades had been vital to sustaining an association that serves the community in multiple ways. Meeting via Zoom, showing her the internet maps, she began to connect them with the knowledge of what was past but no longer present. Stories about lesser known places where an African presence was still visible, such as the banana trees planted near a river. Each week since then has been a distinct adventure, coordinated across 3 time zones from Athens to Porto to New York. Divided by 7, sometimes 8 hours, we've been led from one street to several intersections. Here, Dori is taking us on a memory tour to a few places where he remembered joining others in Afro restaurants, now forced to close from the pressures of gentrification, sharing with us how he sees the city he knows is changing. Over the last few months, we followed a series of guides, extending our eyes, evolving a small network over time across boundaries. Ishmael, a friend of Bia's, brought us to the street where his African barber works. Here we're on Zoom, this time watching his hair being cut, recording their conversation about how his barber started a business, noting that he still has clients who don't believe he's the real owner. We are absent but present, following as we accompany Doña Claudia to meet her old friends Emilia and Paula in a public housing project. Listening to conversations, often with no translation, not fully understanding, but hoping to gather small stories of shared experience, fragments from a multi-generational perspective, without the intention of presenting a grand epic narrative. Last week, Doña Claudia's friend Emilia took us across the railroad tracks to Riobamba, where she had had a garden plot for 13 years before moving to another neighborhood. Once there, through Amelia, we met Eugenia, who told us about what she still harvests each year, and we finally saw the banana plants, planted decades ago, which we had heard about our very first day. Now for the next 4 weeks, we will continue this unpredictable journey of a virtual discovery and find a way to bring all the contributions that we have heard and visualized to be collected together to the Reitoria. There in a gallery space now empty, we envision a remapping of Porto, filling its landscape with memories and images still and moving, along with artifacts of this experimental process of recovery and reflection with what has been passed on and generously offered in exchange with the community of Afro descendants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia, Alfredo, and Susan. Is this the completion of your trio of, all right, okay. Well, we've got just slightly under 50 minutes since one of our participants has, for some reason, probably accidental, not turned up this afternoon. I've taken notes of your very rich and insightful contributions. I can, of course, propose a few topics for a very, very brief discussion. But I suppose I would like to ask, first of all, if as participants in this panel, you would like to ask any questions, respond to anything that you've heard and that you found especially inspiring. Anyone? Yeah, Richard.
I would like to say just how much I enjoyed all my colleagues' presentations very much. I'd like to pick up a point that Alfredo made in his terrific presentation on the question of hospitality and perhaps clarify something. I wasn't suggesting for one moment that hospitality is in fact the way Europe or indeed the world operates at the moment. Far from it. We have a politics of profound inhospitality. So I agree with you totally on that, Alfredo, particularly on the question of immigrants and refugees. The point I was trying to make was, following Simone Weil, was that art proposes against the politics of inhospitality and war, which is what Simone Weil was describing in the Iliad. It is a poem of war, that there are moments that art can provide, that imagination can provide, where enemies, hostes, and that's the common use of the term, hostes is hostility, can be transformed imaginatively and then actually into hospitality. And that is the exception, not the norm. So that's sort of the point I was making. And in terms of Europe, we can look back at, well, 2 major wars in the last century and then 30 years of war in Northern Ireland. But we can see in that tsunami of violence and inhospitality, moments where people stood up like Havel the poet and shook hands with Willy Brandt and exchanged wounded memories between Germany and Czechoslovakia, where John Hume and Gerry Adams shook hands, the terrorist and the peacemaker, and that brought about the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland in 1998. These moments happened. Mandela in South Africa shook hands with de Klerk. Was that the norm? No, that was an exceptional moment. But what I'm saying is that art provides and imagination provides the space and the gap and the delay, to use Simone Weil's terms, that make the impossible possible. So I'm with you absolutely on the question of refugees. This is a very profound challenge to us today. And in my own small way, I run a thing called Guestbook, where we invite young people in Europe and elsewhere in conflicted zones to exchange stories and identities in order to try and bring about, through narrative imagination, the possibility of an impossible peace. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you very much for this clarification, Richard. Now, any other quick questions or responses from our panelists? I've got a question. I suppose it's also a dimension of curiosity that I would have Madalena. I was very much interested in your plea for the universal language of the body and this sense of presence, I suppose, that we very often associated with the joyous body, the body in full possession of its potential. But I suppose you will also, but well, that's the question. You may also take an interest in, the suffering body, the body under duress. Is that something that also comes into the aesthetic, but also social range of what you do? I was years ago inspired by a remark made by the critic Terry Eagleton when he said that suffering, human suffering, is the great trans-historical constant that we've got to balance against a sometimes fracturing sense of particularity. So the body as a suffering entity, does that somehow also come into your aesthetic and, intellectual range?
Yes, I can give you some examples where I have worked and experienced exactly the potentiality of the suffering body when the body starts to fail and we have to relate to it. Two examples. One was in Adelaide in Australia, where the most technological hospital, the Royal Adelaide Hospital, 2 years ago started a strategy of thinking and inquiring about the presence of the arts inside the milieu of the hospital. How can the patients and all the staff of the hospital take advantage or take the arts as something that can help in the quality of life of patients, but also in the process of cure. And I had the enormous chance to be invited to be the choreographer to experiment the first step in this direction. So I created a piece for this hospital, which has 800 single rooms. It's a state hospital, public hospital with individual rooms, which instead of having closed windows has opened windows towards gardens filled with sculptures and works of art. It's a very special building. And I had the opportunity to work with 10 Australian choreographers and also students from all that region, from Korea to Japan to New Zealand, who came along to experience this first trial to see how a hospital can become a dancing space, where the patients could come out of the window, those who were in bed, and look through to the gardens and see something that was changing the atmosphere and the reality of the hospital, but also created solo dances as a dessert, where the patient, instead of having an apple or a pear, can choose a piece of dance. Another example is something I've created for the National Theatre of Lisbon, Teatro Nacional Dona Maria II, 4 years ago, where I was looking at the extreme solitude that a sector of our society, urban society, lives. And this sector of the society, people living in the streets, people coming out of prisons and having no place to go, people with mental disease who are thrown out of their own houses and their families, and how they could become the special guests of my choreography. And this was a piece I have done with university students, and of course with a lot of artists who blended into the creation of a piece that was looking at the visibility of these people who are actually invisible to the eyes of the majority of citizens.
Yes. Thank you very much, Madalena. We've got approximately 5 minutes. I've still got a few questions lined up, but I don't want to monopolize this opportunity for exchanging views. So on your side, I mean, from you, any other questions or responses? You may still mull them. Adessa, there's something that I was curious about, I mean, your experience with the various Erasmus networks. You were giving us a narrative that involved, so I assume, mostly productive encounters and, difference acknowledged and experienced as indeed a basis for coming together. But did your experience also include, for example, moments of conflict that had to be managed? I mean, was that part also of your direct experience in, running some of these networks and taking part in them? Adessa, are you there? Adessa, could you hear me?
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes, we can, but the image froze, but please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely, we can now.
I can hear you, but I cannot see you.
Well, go ahead, we can hear you right now.
Okay, perfect. So yes, when it comes to cultural conflicts, this can arise like very easily, especially when you're not exposed to different cultures, as I was not when I first went on my Erasmus, and it was a very unique experience, and it was I was very curious, to be honest, to learn more about different cultures and to find out what is the cultural identity of people. And of course, sometimes there were some, let's say, cultural accidents, as they are called. But these are very interesting because that's when you get to gain the knowledge and to find out more about the other person and about their cultural identities. So for me, it was when these things arise, it was a space to learn more and to and to understand the other person better. But yeah, later this became more easy, and I got to adapt better in the situation. And also, other people had that with me. Other people had these cultural accidents with me, and it was a very, very fun experience.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I think these incidents, these situations are the best places and the best situations where you can grow as a global citizen, and you can appreciate the uniqueness of other people and why their culture is why they're as people they're not only individuals, but they are they have a holistic aspects of their cultures, and their regions, their local cities or places, their countries, and this integrates also in their individual parts.
Thank you, Adessa. Now we've got 2 minutes. I've got just one question. I know it's very difficult to respond to it in just under 2 minutes. But Susan, it's a similar question to what I was asking Adessa. When you were experiencing, these interfaces with communities, were there moments that in any way proved difficult and had to be managed somehow, interculturally and interpersonally?
How can I begin in 2 minutes to explain?
Oh, well, sorry. Yeah.
I mean, every encounter is complex and unpredictable and unknowing, and any response. I mean, there's a lot of scar tissue, you might say. We talked about the wounds. There's a lot of scar tissue. Do you want to scratch? Do you want to open up memories? It's a very, I mean, one thing is to transform them theatrically or through dance of someone's body. But when you're faced with that body and that pain, what can you say? What can you do? I mean, it goes back to what I think Alfredo is speaking about in the scale that he referenced. I'm working in not with a community is not all together in one. It's many, it's the multiplicity of all those voices and those feelings, and trying to navigate any number of them, especially virtually, I might say, especially with that language, lengua of the body, as you said, Madalena, and lengua of word. So
thank you very much, Susan. It's now 2:30 and I'm being instructed to wrap up and bring this to a close. It was a real delight and it was a joy to share this session. Warmest thanks to all of you. I hope that, after COVID, we can manage somehow to converge for a similar occasion face-to-face. Well, we are face-to-face, but on screen, sadly, for something that in human terms can be, as gratifying as intellectually and aesthetically this session proved to be. Have a great day and thank you so much. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
Thank you so very much, everyone.
Sejam bem-vindos ao Museu de História Natural e da Ciência da Universidade do Porto, um museu universitário com décadas de história inteiramente ao serviço da comunidade. Aqui, em conjunto com todos os nossos públicos e parceiros, investigamos, preservamos e divulgamos coleções de História Natural e da Ciência, para dar a conhecer a história do mundo e também a da Universidade. Todos os dias estudamos as nossas coleções e fazemos-las crescer, nomeadamente no contexto das expedições realizadas pela nossa equipa e parceiros a todos os cantos do planeta. No museu, descrevemos novas espécies para a ciência e dessa forma contribuímos para o conhecimento e a conservação da biodiversidade à escala mundial. Particularmente relevantes são as sólidas parcerias estabelecidas com diversos países africanos de língua oficial portuguesa, com os quais colaboramos diariamente na caracterização do mundo natural.
A cada dia, as nossas coleções são enriquecidas com novos espécimes. Alguns destes de referência, como é o caso dos vouchers depositados no Herbário PO. Estes constituem valiosos recursos que são usados como ponto de partida para a delineação de projetos de investigação realizados no contexto de redes nacionais e internacionais.
As portas do museu e as suas coleções estão de facto abertas a todos. Investigadores de universidades e centros de investigação de todo o mundo recorrem constantemente às nossas coleções. Em particular, as coleções de arqueologia são frequentemente solicitadas por peritos nacionais e estrangeiros. Amostras obtidas a partir de elementos biológicos destas coleções são utilizadas em análises moleculares no contexto de estudos de populações humanas que têm vindo a permitir reconstituir o nosso passado e a história evolutiva. O nosso museu alberga uma das maiores coleções de esqueletos humanos dos últimos caçadores-recoletores pré-históricos da Europa, que tem vindo a ser estudada por equipas multidisciplinares.
Para além da história da nossa espécie, as coleções do museu são também usadas para reconstruir a história do nosso planeta. Apenas com recurso ao registro fóssil, conseguimos conhecer o aspecto de animais, plantas e outros organismos já extintos. Um exemplo clássico são os dinossauros. Mas na coleção de paleontologia do museu encontramos outros fósseis igualmente fascinantes, como por exemplo estes, colhidos aqui bem perto em São Pedro da Cova e depositados no museu. Neles podemos observar a interação entre plantas e insetos. Estes testemunhos do passado ajudam-nos a reconstruir habitats que existiam há milhares e até milhões de anos.
E do passado, voltamos ao presente, destacando o contributo das coleções biológicas do museu para monitorizar a biodiversidade e saúde ambiental. Aqui recolhemos e conservamos amostras biológicas não invasivas de aves e seus parasitas, que são utilizadas em estudos toxicológicos, genéticos e isotópicos realizados às escalas nacional e internacional.
As coleções de insetos do museu são usadas de várias formas e estudadas com várias finalidades. Por exemplo, neste momento, um dos projetos em que estamos a colaborar é a lista vermelha dos invertebrados. E de que maneira é que isso se faz? As coleções são estudadas, os exemplares são identificados, os dados são registados e vão servir para a avaliação do Estatuto de Ameaça das Espécies em Portugal continental.
Os parceiros e utilizadores do museu são, sem dúvida, múltiplos e diversificados. A nossa equipa colabora de forma constante com empresas de consultoria ambiental, autarquias e ONGs, prestando apoio técnico especializado e consultoria, nomeadamente no contexto da definição de planos municipais e de ordenamento do território e orlas costeiras, bem como em estudos de impacto e monitorização ambiental.
O museu é um espaço aberto à comunidade académica. Muitos são estudantes que, anualmente, aqui encontram as condições ideais para a realização dos seus estágios, sejam estes de âmbito curricular ou extracurricular. Muitos dos dados obtidos no contexto destes estágios, como por exemplo o registro de diferentes espécimes, são colocados à disposição da comunidade internacional através da sua incorporação em bases de dados de acesso livre.
Além dos estudantes, temos também o privilégio de acolher no museu voluntários dinâmicos e dedicados, alguns detentores de um vasto conhecimento em áreas muito diversas, na esfera das ciências, artes e património, que connosco colaboram no estudo, promoção, divulgação e valorização das coleções.
Nesta lógica de abertura à comunidade, a ciência cidadã também é uma área que muito valorizamos. Para além da promoção dos nossos próprios projetos, participamos igualmente em projetos internacionais, como é o caso, por exemplo, do Silent Cities, para o qual estamos a contribuir com a disponibilização de registros sonoros para a monitorização de aves em zonas urbanas.
De igual forma, o património e o conhecimento do museu são também disponibilizados ao grande público, através de múltiplas atividades de divulgação e promoção da cultura científica, muitas destas desenvolvidas em colaboração com outros museus, centros de ciência e centros de monitorização e interpretação ambiental, entre outras entidades culturais e científicas.
A promoção cultural mediada pelo museu decorre dentro e fora de portas. As nossas peças estão continuamente em circulação, quer fisicamente, quer através dos mais diversos suportes e canais digitais, figurando em exposições, catálogos, publicações e repositórios nacionais e internacionais.
Mas a aventura começa desde logo nos espaços do museu e nas suas exposições. Na Galeria da Biodiversidade, por exemplo, podemos observar diversas amostras de minerais que fazem as delícias dos visitantes. Aqui, podemos inclusivamente observar uma amostra de esmeralda em estado bruto, antes de ser transformada e lapidada. Portanto, antes de adquirir a forma típica de joia semi-preciosa que estamos habituados a reconhecer.
Neste momento em que nos preparamos para abrir um deslumbrante espaço expositivo no polo central do museu, que é o reabilitado Laboratório Químico Ferreira da Silva, estamos a preparar instrumentos, utensílios, produtos químicos, livros e mobiliário que nos irão permitir dar corpo à narrativa que preparamos. O convite fica desde já feito. Esperamos poder contar tão brevemente quanto possível com a vossa visita.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have the enormous pleasure to present and to talk with the philosopher Daniel Innerarity. Innerarity is a professor of political philosophy at University of the Basque Country, also at European University Institute of Florence, and is the director of the Institute of Democratic Governance. Between a long list of essays and books and prizes that he received, I will only show you one that was really important for me, very, very important for me. It was this one, philosophy as one of the fine arts. Probably we can talk something about it also. But today is books about democracy, the pandemic and democracy, and of course, this relation between democracy and culture and university will be priority for our talk. Because we have only 10 minutes, I pass right away for him, and we can start with this concept, with this question of what's culture for. Can we start with this question, Daniel? What's the use of this concept, and if we can also use it in the context of university?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Paulo, for your questions. Thank you very, very much to Fatima Vieira, my friend of Porto. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I would like to start with a little opinion about what is the meaning of culture. For your amazing debate. If someone were to ask what a symphony is for, what a poem is for, we should recommend that they review the concept of usefulness. It goes against the very idea of culture to demand that it must be something to be justified. Culture is not to be justified. It's not something needed to a justification. Even, for example, even if literary works enrich the language we are using, even if religious ceremonies are performed in cathedrals, even if music changes our moods, there is in all of them a dimension that resists being justified by their performance. To ask your question, I would say, we don't really know what culture is for. Probably it is an unanswerable question. But perhaps the problem is that this is a question that makes little sense and is driven by our obsession that things should be justified by their utility. Culture suffers from this pressure more than from the scarcity of resources, even in time of crisis. If the right parties or politicians understand culture in terms of its usefulness for competitiveness, while the left sees it as the key to solving social problems. In both cases, culture is subordinated to a purpose, and thus it is underestimated in its intrinsic value. What is culture for? If one, something especially for those who work in universities, if one, or in educational institutions, if one only learns what is useful, one runs the risk of not paying attention to the really relevant issues. studying what is needed for life is one of the least interesting things to do at the school or university. What we should be asking ourselves is how useful is to ask about the usefulness of culture. That's my answer to your question.
Thank you, Daniel. And there's another one that is related with this one. That's what's really a cultural experience. What can you say about that?
Okay, in principle, culture puts us in contact with others, with many people, with certain creators, with the public, with other participants in the same event. But to me, culture is basically an experience that leaves us alone with ourselves. All strategies of cultural animation and educational promotion, even if they are carried out with others, with other people, have to happen in oneself, in one's own sensibility and thinking. There are learning experiences that are not realized in the current mystic of teamwork, interactivity, group, or connectivity. What is a really obsession in our time? For example, what if our educational failures had less to do with resistance to cooperate, as usually we interpret them, than with inability for certain solitary experiences, such as reading, reflecting, or listening. The concept of culture that I propose you right now is intimately linked to the capacity for solitary experiences through a certain kind of disconnection, connection with others, connection with the work of others, but disconnection, generally speaking. One of the most vulgar meanings of the term culture is linked with identity. And I will say something about it. This connection with identity is expressed very often in such a way that in the cultural happenings, we would do nothing more than develop what we are, what we already are, and we somehow celebrate this identity collectively, or make explicit what we already know, without learning or significant experiences. It is not my way of thinking about it. In this way, we lose sight of the true nature of culture. The culture is not the unfolding of one's identity, but the means by which we manage dissatisfaction with our lack of identity. It's the other way around. Culture is for managing our lack of identity, to complete this lack of identity, not to celebrate it.
That question, well, it remember me a lot of questions that I had to do, but we have only 1 minute, and I really want to do this one. But this idea of the relation between cultural identity, it's crucial, but also the possibility of thinking about the relation between culture and democracy. You have been written a lot about democracy. Can you tell us something about these two dimensions, or probably more closer than we thought?
Okay, in principle, a democratic system cannot work without a public that is knowledgeable, in the sense that they really know what is at stake. the problem we have, in my opinion, the problem we have in contemporary democracies is in part due to the fact that we, the people, don't understand what is at stake in the political life. And for me, the first problem we have is a problem of understandability, comprehension of what is going on in politics. Politics is becoming something strange, something difficult to comprehend for people, to understand, to be understand for people. And in my opinion, the first step to democratization of our society would be precisely that of explain, make clear what is at stake in the current situation of the world, what is very different to many other to our ancient situation or situations of the past. What is at stake in a peculiar fashion to be in the world, in a world interconnected, dense interactions with technologies that are very, very complex.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was a great pleasure for me. We have a lot of things to talk about. We have only these 10 minutes, but I'm sure we'll meet again and keep talking. Thank you so much, and see you soon. Looking forward.
Thank you, Paolo. Next time in Porto, I hope, with Patricia.
Thank you so much.
With Fatima, sorry.
Hi, good afternoon. I would like to introduce panel 3 now, Scientific and Artistic Worldview. So I will be giving the floor to the Vice Rector for Research and Innovation from the Universidade Católica of Portugal, Mr. Peter Hannenberg.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, and welcome to this panel, which has a very difficult task, following up directly on what was one of the topics of the conversation before, namely the question, what is culture good for? And what we are trying to answer in the next 80 minutes is a very difficult question exactly in this range when it comes to the challenge of bringing together the artistic and the scientific worldview. We have heard in the morning the minister speaking about the two cultures by C.P. Snow, which is exactly the opposite of what this panel wants to suggest. And we also heard in Alberto Manuel's talk about the unity of knowledge which should be achieved. How to do this and what it would be good for to do this and to bring arts and science together. This is the challenge of this panel today. I'm quite confident that a former Minister of Education from Brazil, Renato Ribeiro, that the President of the National Agency for Scientific and Technology Culture, known as Ciencia Viva, Rosalia Vargas, that Angelos Andrianos from the European Commission working in the Education and Culture Directorate, that Paola Spinozzi, who has published a very important book on cultures of sustainability and well-being, that Pedro Rodrigues, as my colleague as Vice Rector at the University of Porto and a scientist by training, and finally, and last but not least, the voice of the arts by Miguel Januario will help us to understand what actually it would mean to bring together the artistic and scientific worldviews. And it is a pleasure to start with Professor Renato Ribeiro. The floor is yours.
Good morning for me, because it's still morning in Brazil. Good afternoon for all of you who are in Portugal or elsewhere in Europe. I will talk about the importance of arts and literature to open the minds of people in the academic world. We academics share a consensus that good universities make scientific research and do their best in order to train professionals that be competent in their scientific and technological skills. The problem is that there is no such consensus or practice about the artistic field, but there should be. To begin with, our mission is to educate people that will be good in their professional skills, but also in their non-professional lives. Non-professional lives comprehend, first, their social and political life. Second, their personal and private life. But in higher education, we prioritize the abilities of comprehension, arithmetic, and writing. Thus, artistic, musical, and literary skills are not deemed a priority. But all important abilities or experience must be considered as equally necessary if you want to educate a rather integral person, one who will be able to fully develop his or her potentials. Our educational job has thus been, until now, rather incomplete. In order to have more creative persons, art should get a greater share in education. I shall distinguish between sciences as a whole and the rather vague field of humanities. Sometimes they are understood to include human sciences, but I will concentrate myself on a core of humanities composed of all arts, including literature and also philosophy. They are close to sciences, but are not sciences. And why? Because they do not believe in progress. Science has at its core an idea of progress, as technology has an idea of improvement. Science deems the discovery as essential. Technology deems the invention as such. Their ideal would be to consider as more scientific the less results available. I would even add the less results available online. Of course, there is no such thing as one scientific result or the scientific result. Results are always plural. Disagreement and controversy belong to their core, and scientists know how much they owe to the shoulders of all the great scientists, as Newton, Albert Einstein, Karl Marx, Max Weber. But the advancement of science, which is part of the name of the important American Association for the Advancement of Science, is the reason why we have labs and libraries and funding, and why we are academics, and even why we are here now. However, history of science is not a central discipline in the study of sciences. What was good in past science has been embodied in present-day science. What was bad or wrong has been abandoned. Actually, almost all of our conscious experience of social life in these days is grounded on the aims of progress and improvement. We desire to get more and better goods, but we also desire to get more and better rights. Even spirituality, as shown by the so-called theology of prosperity, is supposed to deliver a better life in this world, measured by the riches you will gather. We also wish to get more from love and friendship than our parents got. This is the dominant mindset of our times. Humans are different. Of course, Kant explored the matters ignored by Plato, but Plato also discussed the issues that Kant did not take into account. There's no progress in the humanities. Their history is very alive. We obviously know the discoveries Picasso and Proust made in art and literature, but we may not claim they are superior to Da Vinci or Dante Alighieri. Here, I will concentrate on arts and literature and leave aside my own field, which is philosophy. What we get from the arts, all of them, visual, scenic, music, and literature, is a simultaneous coexistence of everything that has already been made and has a good quality, even though criteria for quality may be open to discussion. Thus, humanities, and especially arts and literature, give us an alternative to the progress-addicted, utilitarian mindset I sustain to be the main feature of our times. They can open up minds. They help people to understand that breaking habits is good. Arts and literature are, of course, academic fields, but there is neither refutation nor advancement in what arts, writers, and philosophers do. This is the experience arts and literature may convey to students. Since our students are embedded from the start in an everyday culture of novelty, of consumerism, where everything should constantly be updated, they must be aware of the factors in human culture that cannot reduce it to the last result online. They should not share a naive belief that our times are superior to all others. This attitude might keep them from indulging in some sort of hybris, a sin which to blame for much of imperialist, gender, and colonialist oppression. It's also important for them as researchers, since many cultures which have been called primitive or underdeveloped have shown unexpected riches. There's a human cultural diversity which can be compared in its richness to the enormous biodiversity we only begin to explore. Artistic education may develop in our students an attention to what does not belong to a society a little too prone to reducing the amplitude of human experience to Western concepts. There is no such thing as the end of history. Previously to being Minister of Education of Brazil, I have led for some years the evaluation of graduate studies programs in my country. This I did from 2004 to 2008. It's a hard task, and one of our main issues is that most scholars follow the steps of their more distinguished colleagues. There is a contradiction in quality research. We expect people to break new grounds, but we measure their endeavors according to what they publish in the best periodicals of their fields. Obviously, it's not easy to take risks and to make brand new discoveries. Most of what is done in science is incremental, not completely innovative. We should thus reduce the belief in progress. We should not show people that conflicting ways of seeing the world can and do coexist. The best examples we find in art. We can bring students to compare paintings from the Middle Age and the Renaissance, the ones before and without perspective, the others consecrating it. This may show that them different mindsets that are all valid. So we may help our students to think in other ways. Or if we take literature, is there a better way to help young people to understand love than making them read the great novels about love and passion, or see the best films that show the aspects of amorous experience? How can we presume to educate young people without talking to them about love? And how should we get this? How should we do this? It's important, first of all, that every student get in touch with the works of art of the whole world and of several different ages. They must know art and its history. This should begin this childhood and continue until higher education. At every level, we should raise the standards and contents of what is taught, but we should never confine history of art or experience of art to a specific period or society. We could show Lascaux Cave and Picasso at the same time, or Van Gogh and Japanese art. Or when we present art from the beginning of the Common Era, we could show art from Egypt, the Americas, China, even though those countries or continents were not in touch at that time. We should strike their imagination. And secondly, it's also crucial to give them the opportunity of experiencing different languages, such as music, visual arts, writing, scenic arts. They must practice art. We should not worry about the quality of their performance. There will be no problem at all if it's bad or even very bad. What matters is that they learn how to draw, to sing, to write, to play, that they feel as possible co-authors of art. When you speak a language, even if you do this badly, with much accent, which a lot of folks, you understand a little more is culture. And this should be a feature in education from childhood to university. Artistic education will reveal some real talents, and this will be good. But for most people, it will be a way to get them more familiar with art. They will not be artists. They will be people who know art, who live art. We must aim to make art an integral part of daily life. Universities can do a good job if, by giving arts and literature a greater share in their departments and courses. They help students to escape from being what Herbert Marcuse once called one-dimensional men. We live in a society that's becoming more and more plural. We must be conscious we are multidimensional persons and help people to dive in this rich, complex society of both our present and future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for this intriguing talk, inviting too many thoughts. And I'm sure that in the end, when Miguel Januari will be talking about his project more or less, we will see how much that you were saying about progress and how society at large is aiming at more and more and more, and art might be not. More or less might be a good project and a good way to do so. But before that, let us go to Rosalia Vargas from the Ciencia Viva initiative. Please, Rosalia.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. And congratulations for the organizers of this summit, Fátima Vieira, Vice Rector, and Paulo Duval. Thank you very much. And Peter Hannenberg, I'm very happy to have you as a convener in this session and all colleagues around the table. Well, we are here today to discuss the benefits of promoting at higher education institutions joining arts and science. And a person from my team once shared the story with me that I will let you know now. She was invited to take part in a program organized by Roche, the pharmaceutical company that puts together 70 people from a scientific background and 30 from arts, either music, painting, dancing, or others, during the Salzburg Festival in Austria. And she told me it was one of the best experiences she has ever had, because she understood the power of creativity, both in arts and science. And the discussion among these two groups of people allowed each other to understand how creative scientists have to be to think, design, and produce experiments to achieve discoveries. And scientists also, they realized how creative artists have to be daily and how that could inspire them. In fact, she also told me during her PhD, even after her master in biochemistry, she only really started working her creativity and critical thinking during her PhD. And we know how creativity and critical thinking should be empowered by university from early on. And I was impressed with the project from Porto University. I heard today from Fátima Vieira, Cultural Corridor in the City. Well, I think the name is this one, and is a project opening the university to the cultural communities. Bravo! I think I will move to Porto very soon. Again. Well, in Ciencia Viva, we have been doing this connection between science and arts over the time. And now I would like briefly to present you two examples developed with Ciencia Viva and partners. One already took place 11 years ago, and another one more recent. We started 2 years ago, and now we are renovating our partnership. Now I will share some pictures. I will share some pictures. Well, good. I'm almost there. Here, And in this example is about the art residencies program, experimentation, art and science and technology, a program that resulted in a partnership between Ciência Viva and the General Direction of the Arts from the Portuguese Ministry of Culture to shape a platform for work and research with scientists and artists. And from 2007 and 2010, 18 artists developed transdisciplinary experimental projects within research laboratories throughout the country. And making use of the tools and process typical of scientific research. And in these two examples, on the left, we have the PLACE project by Tiago Dionísio. He made the residence at the Institute of the Pathology and Molecular, no, this is on the right. On the left, Institute of Systems and Computers from Porto, the INESC Porto. And on the right, we have What We Are and Who Are We by Sónia Moreira, this residence of the Institute of Pathology and Molecular Immunology of University of Porto, IPATIMUP. Well, it seems that I choose by chance these two projects from University in Porto, but Porto used to be very, very active, as we know. And in Ciência Viva, we have been doing this connection between science and arts over the time. And both these projects and the others were presented to the public in a big exhibition at the Pavilion of Knowledge, our science center in Lisbon. But I have this second example, is called Joias da Coroa, is Science Jewelry, which was a project organized with ARCO, is Art and Visual Communication Center. And the art students created jewelry pieces inspired by different areas, as you can see in these examples. They created pieces inspired in medical engineering, marine biology, biochemistry, medicine, or biology. And I can assure you, on a life, they was beautiful pieces. And there was a runway at the Pavilion of Knowledge in our science center, show where scientists presented these jewelry pieces. We even have the pleasure to have our President of Republic visiting the exhibition, as you can see. But really, I would like to pay your attention, because here we can see some scientists with the jewels in the runway. As we have, for example, Maria Mota from the Institute of Molecular Medicine from Lisbon with a beautiful pieces, or Otávio Mateus, a paleontologist with a pin, and Elsa Ange from the Faculty of Pharmacy. These are examples that we are very keen to pursue this collaboration in between science and art. And I believe science and art should never be divided, and culture and people will always benefit from this connection. And thank you again for this opportunity to participate in such a challenging summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I hope that not all scientists have to transform into models in the end. But any form of the encounter between art and science is certainly what we want to achieve. We were now going on with Angelos Angelianos from the European Commission. And I don't see him now, but he will be online in a second. Angelos?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Can you see me now?
No.
Hi.
There seems to be something in front of your camera.
Strange. Any better now?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry about this. I'm afraid we will have to go on with sound only, if that's okay for you.
For us is okay. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much, of course, for giving us the opportunity to be with you today. And my argument is nothing new. We heard everything about it already during the day. Is the argument that promoting the creative arts in higher education is a necessity, not an option. I will also argue that we should be infusing the arts across disciplines in higher education. From earlier speakers, we heard that culture and the arts add value to the lives of individuals, to our societies, and to our economies in many different ways. Indeed, the evidence on the wider benefits of culture is growing. This morning, we heard the Commissioner Gabriel, who mentioned some figures showing that the cultural and creative industries are one of the European Union's major economic success stories, having a yearly turnover of 440 billion euros, contributing as much as 4.2% of EU GDP, and providing something like 7.4 million jobs in 2019 alone, the year before the pandemic. To this, I would add that the core cultural and creative sector businesses have proven to be particularly resilient and outperforming the average survival rates of service enterprises since 2008, as early as 2008. The number of core cultural and creative sector companies have been growing by 4.3% annually before being hit by the pandemic. In 2017, there were 1.1 million cultural enterprises in EU 27. So from this position of great strength, the creative and cultural sectors provide a key strategic pillar to drive the economic recovery of the EU, I would say, and to transform our lives as we hope to build back better. The creative disciplines and the organizations they serve will be crucial to restoring and rebuilding the civic and social fabric of the EU's towns, cities, and high streets. The success of this European Union's creative and cultural industries would not have been possible without the talent pipeline generated by our creative arts schools, both the specialist providers and the art and design faculties in universities. Moreover, progression from our undergraduate degree programs feeds the postgraduate and research base, and the extensive contribution the sector makes to the economic, societal, and cultural health of the EU. 2016 research from the Innovation Foundation, Nesta, shows that companies that harness both art and science, both STEAM and STEM, outperform competitors in terms of sales, employment, productivity, and innovation. Yet, in many parts of the world, the creative disciplines seem to be under attack. The increasing focus on graduate salaries as a measure of success is undermining cultural and creative courses and degrees. There's an assumption that is largely shared by many educators, policymakers, and corporate lobbyists that the creative artists constitute a leisure field. The creative arts constitute a leisure field of study that does not help you pay your bills. Our society is calling for more and more graduates of science and technology, granting the creative arts a smaller and smaller portion of the educational pie. So are the creative arts dead as a field of study, or is there value in seeking to reverse the trend? I think that we need to restore some balance, to promote the idea that creative arts are as important to society as is science and technology, and to value them more. Of course, we should support STEM subjects and degrees, but not at the expense of the creative arts. We'll now turn to the need to infuse the arts across disciplines. We are told that we need new thinking in the current world economic crisis and global environmental concerns. We are also told that in education, a new critically reflexive form of creativity is required to address the task of establishing a stable, safe, ethical, and empathetic world within which a productive, adaptive, and innovative workforce can operate. The real world is asking us to be much more than highly specialized workers. It is also asking us to be friends, to be partners, to be parents, employers, citizens, and human beings. Today's world demands creativity and innovation of the many, and not just a few artists and research scientists. Isolated disciplines and high specialization alone cannot cultivate the habits of mind that underpin creativity and innovation. Even the most profound scientific knowledge would not solve problems, world problems such as hunger, inequality, and environmental damage if we fail to respect, understand, and engage cultural differences and human interdependency. The study of art subjects cultivates, we heard it a lot earlier, the study of art subjects cultivates a broader knowledge and understanding of the world. It helps students engage in some of the most important issues of today: environment, foreign policy, social justice, national and international security, ethics, indeed, all of the issues we face as humans in relationship to others. In this context, arts has a broad meaning, covering culture and languages, but also humanities and the social sciences. Through the study of art, music, literature, history, and other humanities and social sciences, we gain a greater understanding of the human condition than hard science alone can provide. This is why our higher education transformation agenda in the European Union promotes the STEAM approach, integrating STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and maths, with the study of the arts. Complementing STEM learning with arts subjects prepares students not only to make a living, but also to make a life. It can prepare students to reckon with a broad variety of lived experiences, with work, love, death, joy, sorrow, faith, passion, pain, injustice, disagreements, conflict, intolerance, pleasure, forgiveness, and all of the myriad choices that make up the human experience. Artistic subjects cultivate curiosity, investigation, self-expression and communication, experimentation, imagination, reflection, and sociability. Dispositions that are central to a great career, and a fulfilling life. Dispositions that help students confront their own and others' humanity, not just earn a paycheck. Higher education institutions are necessarily creative places. Framing problems is, of course, a good way to start solving them. And as suggested by earlier speakers, it may be that one of several imperatives is to move beyond traditional dominant methodological models. There is a need for participatory methodology working across discipline boundaries. Commissioner Gabriel mentioned the new European Bauhaus. Interdisciplinarity and participatory methodology is at the heart of the new Bauhaus initiative, which is to act as a bridge between science and technology on the one hand, and the world of art and culture on the other. The aim is to create a space for reflection and experimentation, a hub for global networks involving architects, artists, engineers, and civil society. It will bring together practitioners from across disciplines and will mobilize creative minds to reimagine how sustainable living could and should be in the future. My final word is about obstacles to interdisciplinarity and the responsibility of the academic community. Despite progress in recent years, there are still disincentives to interdisciplinarity in our universities. We have been talking about structural barriers to interdisciplinarity for decades now. These barriers are too hard to die. And in my view, the academic community still has to do a good amount of soul searching before we can call it a victory. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for these three very important arguments addressing how much culture and cultural industries can contribute to economy, but also speaking about what is not an economic perspective on the arts when it comes to train and educate for life. And the last remark on academia, I think, is very important. And we are all suffering from that in the sense that disciplinary restraints are very strong and interdisciplinary is much harder to achieve than we sometimes dream of. But I think Paola Spinozzi has found a way to bridge fields and therefore we are very much looking forward to what she's going to tell us.
Can you see me? Okay, good. So thank you. Well, what I'm going to say is very much in tune with what Angelos has just said. So that's very good. But of course, before starting, I cannot not thank my friend, Fatima Vieira, with whom we have shared a lifelong love for utopia as a genre and utopianism as a frame of mind. So today, I would like to propose, very strongly propose, that the reappraisal of the demarcations between the humanities and the sciences starts from an assumption, the assumption that literature and the arts, and not only the sciences, are cognitive systems, and that the sciences, and not only the arts, are systems of representation. Can you see me now? Can you see my yeah, good. Are systems of representation that offer accounts of the world. So both the sciences and the arts are systems of knowledge and of representation. And knowledge, creative, critical, scientific, requires narrative. Narrative is a form of hermeneutics, a tool for constructing interpretations of reality. And narrative is a form of epistemology, a tool for shaping knowledge. Narrative is exactly what we produce, studying, writing, lecturing. It originates from knowledge and is expressed through description, representation, and communication. Rachel Carson, just to name one of the many that I could name and talk about, Rachel Carson's ability to be a marine biologist and a nature writer is what allowed her to create a powerful ecological representation and narrative and inspire environmentalism. So, trite as it may sound, interdisciplinarity is the way. Pity has been evoked far too often, which means that it has not been achieved yet. Anxiety about lack of academic relevance and desire for self-validation have haunted the humanities for decades now, and Angelos was mentioning that, and not only him. In 2004, I would like to mention this example. 2014, a group of literary scholars, historians, and geographers from different countries met at two workshops. One organized by the Environmental Humanities Laboratory at the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, the other by the Research Center for the Humanities and Social Sciences at National Chung Sing University in Taichung, Taiwan. After discussing what the environmental humanities are, what opportunities they present, what convergences could be identified to build up common methods, they came to a disappointing conclusion, finally presented by Hannes Bergthaler, and I quote, "When policymakers and mainstream media outlets seek expertise on the environmental crisis today, they seldom turn to environmental historians and philosophers, much less to eco-critics. This state of affairs is all the more perplexing as those working in the so-called STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which attract the lion's share of public attention and funding, have come to recognize that scientific know-how by itself is insufficient to successfully address climate instability, soil erosion, freshwater shortages, and a host of other chronic social ecological afflictions. Eco-critics continue to invoke the virtues of interdisciplinary research, but the invoking has always been somewhat ritual in character. And when it comes to conducting the actual research, the execution rather limited. As a whole, the field now risks becoming complacent and hidebound, thanks to its hard-won and newfound respectability as a branch of literary studies." End of quote. Now that interdisciplinary research and teaching on the ecological humanities elicit encouraging responses, a sense of self-complacency is hardly unexpected. Truth is, interdisciplinarity is double-edged. It is refreshing as it is frustrating, in that it exposes how uneven disciplines are. While some spirits have been lifted by discussing and teaching ecology in literature and the arts and dialoguing with other disciplines in ways that matter, certain disciplines matter more and receive better funding and better attention, of course. If interdisciplinarity has proved only partially productive so far, let us move forward. Let us adopt hyperdisciplinarity, knowing that it entails much more than rejoicing when sociologists and historians talk, geneticists and chemists collaborate, economists and political scientists attend the same conference, lo and behold, physicians and bioengineers co-publish, engineers and experimental physicists work in the same department, mathematicians and architects submit a joint research project. Short excursions out of our disciplinary comfort zones are not sufficient. We need to gain familiarity with methods and mentalities and narratives as different from ours as possible. The sciences pursue cutting-edge paths and tend to forget about history, driven as they are by the quest for discovery, evidence, advancement. The humanities are sensitive to the historical continuum and value the preservation of cultural memory that makes sense of ecological crisis and the approaching climate apocalypse. Hyper, from ancient Greek uper and Proto-Indo-European uper, means over, above. to assimilate the inevitable sense of cognitive estrangement generated by this hyper perspective that requires projecting critical thought and practicing over and above our own disciplines, we will listen, learn, absorb, assimilate, adapt, and evolve. Hyperdisciplinarity requires three phases. For the first, we need resonance chambers in which truly diverse minds see each other, experience disorientation, join forces. For the second, we need to build up effective outreach strategies whereby all the hyperdisciplinary thinking and planning go out, circulate in the public sphere, and connect people, organizations, decision makers. To achieve the third, we need to form new generations of researchers who, while using the skills from their specific backgrounds, understand that the sustainability of the environment and the well-being of all life forms coexist in the same imbricated system. The joint PhD program in environmental sustainability and well-being, founded at the University of Ferrara in November 2019, this is our third year, is forming scholars as well as scientists, and of course, the next generations of hyper-disciplinary researchers. But I want to stress this, it's not only for young researchers, it is for young researchers as much as it is for us, scholars and scientists now. We study the sustainability of the environment, both as a physical habitat and a metaphorical milieu, and the well-being of all living organisms. The training is based on the synergy of four macro areas. 1, the humanities and the social sciences. 2, economics and law. 3, architecture, urban planning and engineering. 4, life, chemical and biomedical sciences. Each research project must connect at least 2 among these macro areas, which means, for example, just to give an example, that literature and archaeology wouldn't be enough. It has to connect one of those 2 very different macro areas. Each student has a main supervisor and at least 2 more co-supervisors who represent the different macro areas relevant to the research project. All students attend seminars and conferences involving national and international scholars and scientists who are members as well as guests of the program. Assimilating each other's methods and narrative is essential to managing heritage, energy resources, and productive activities in fragile habitats. The scientific and aesthetic worldview I propose with our PhD program is a hyper-disciplinary one in which ecological minds understand and enhance the interdependence between the sustainability of the environment and the well-being of living organisms by developing their own specific worldview and acquiring the worldview of the others. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paola. I was saying that interdisciplinary work is difficult, and now you are suggesting hyperdisciplinary work, which is maybe the better word for what we actually need to do. It might be the conclusion that interdisciplinary work is not enough, but it has to be reformulated as transdisciplinary or hyperdisciplinary, as you are suggesting. So many food for thought and many ways of trying to organize research and training at the university. And no one better than Pedro Rodriguez as Vice Rector for Research can help us to continue on this path.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for the organizing committee to invite me to be in this session. I'm fundamentally a scientist, an academic, and although I'm not a specialist on the relationship between art and science, I was challenged to give my contribution to this meeting. This is, of course, a personal view, couldn't be otherwise, and is based on my experience as a scientist and as someone who has a responsibility to structure the science that is carried out within a university, but also a person who has generally interest in art and especially the visual arts and architecture. I'm aware that this topic is very vast, and so I will try my intervention to address some of the questions raised by the organizers. The relationship between art and science has always attracted academic interest, and numerous in-depth analyses have been published over the years. There are plenty of books and essays around this matter. Many of these studies address the similarities and differences between the artistic and scientific creative processes, and investigate the mutual influences and interactions between the world of art and the world of science. Recent scientific and technological advances have opened up a huge number of technical possibilities, and above all, have posed many complex questions in society. Perhaps more than ever, science has a huge impact on artistic creation. On the other hand, with the growth of scientific activity in the search for solutions of societal problems, there is a need to improve both the scientific creation process and the dialogue with society, areas that can greatly benefit from the interaction with the world of art. Therefore, it's not surprising that in recent times this matter has received an increased attention from the science policymakers. I would like to share a couple of pictures, if I can. I will try. I don't know if you are seeing them. Are you seeing the pictures? Okay. So not wanting to be conceptual about the discussion, what is art, what is science, I believe that it will be difficult to dispute that Leonardo da Vinci's well-known anatomical drawings represent an artistic vision of the author. But they also show a level of detail that is characteristic of scientific illustrations. These drawings were essential to the understanding of human body in the 16th century and allowed the advance of surgery in the time of limited access to anatomic information. In fact, there's also the case of, in fact, there are countless examples of which art have proved to be fundamental to scientific progress. Everyone will remember the imaginative early representations of exotic animals of the 15th, 16th century, such as Albrecht Dürer's print of a rhinoceros, which became immensely popular and prompted the interest of the fauna and flora of distant worlds. Another example is the case of the Muybridge first sequential photograph images of 1877 that before the cinema was even invented, and allowed a scientific glimpse of movement. For the first time, it was possible to document in detail the biomechanical aspects of a horse in movement. I think some of you might know about the 5,000 years old Egyptian paintings of the geese of Meidum, present on the tomb of Nefertart, where two species of geese are illustrated in great detail, one can appreciate here. One is perfectly identifiable and common in the region even today, and the other doesn't exist anymore, leading us to believe that we are in the presence of a detailed characterization of an extinct species. Valuable information there is. And everyone knows from the chemistry lessons from the high school, at least, the periodic table invented by Mendeleev in the 19th century, where the different known chemical elements were represented. It's interesting to think about that the early version of the early version of this periodic table would have looked if artists had been involved in its creation. For sure, it wouldn't be that boring and would be much more informative. So, and I will take out I will take out the sharing. But one of the fields that there is natural to talk about intersection between arts, culture, science, and technology is undoubtedly architecture. Just think of the avant-garde Bauhaus school that was mentioned in the first quarter of the 20th century, and the impact that this aesthetic movement had on fields of knowledge, from construction of buildings, urban planning, to furniture design, among many others. If one just think about it, Brasilia was designed by Niemeyer, that was heavily influenced by the Bauhaus movement. I think there's nothing else to be said. And moreover, it's quite interesting, as was mentioned, that a century later, the European Union have launched an initiative to implement a new Bauhaus, a transdisciplinary program between art, cultural science, and technology that integrates values such as social inclusion, ecology, and sustainability. But how can art contribute to advance of knowledge and promote transdisciplinary approach in science? Besides the contribution that art can give to improve the interaction of science with society, I'm certain that the insights and skills acquired by scientists when working together with artists, for example, in matters such as science communication, are tremendously useful for scientists when they need to communicate, when they prepare grants, applications, and public presentations of proposals and results. But one of the possibilities would be to invest strongly on space for dialogue and interaction between artists and scientists, allowing an effective co-creation, a word often used nowadays, but in my opinion, still with very limited practical results. The ideas coming from the art world may at first sight appear to my colleague scientists to be of little relevance to the resolution of a specific scientific task, as they fall outside the technical domain. However, they may prove to be essential to boost innovation. Knowledge that may initially seem to be peripheral represents a change in perspective and may lead to the members of the working group to see a problem differently, thus revealing new solutions. And I think that's very important. How can art contribute to the valorization of preservation of scientific heritage and knowledge? That's another question that was put forward by the organizers. Is unquestionable the importance that science and the natural history museums had since the 19th century for the education and popularization of science in general. In more recent times, we saw some examples. The growth of scientific activity and interest in technology have driven the creation of so-called science technology museums and parks all over the world. A true collaborative work between art and science is essential for the success of their exhibitions, their educational programs, and a fruitful relationship with society. However, it could be of great importance that the old natural history museums and their collections were more closely studied and valued according to today's vision. I think it's fundamental to recover the often forgotten scientific cultural heritage to promote its musealization and the production of specialized publications. I think that should be one priority. So the impact of the huge societal transformations independently promoted by art and science give us an indication what could be achieved if there was a greater interaction between these two worlds. I believe it is in our hands to take the road not taken, as Robert Frost has said in his poem. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Pedro. And thank you also for having shown two examples in which actually this encounter of art and science is already or has been already at place. One outstanding example is architecture. Architecture is at the same time art and science. And it is very practical in effect, and it's very beautiful in effect as well. And the other example that you were giving in the beginning, Renaissance artists were simultaneously scientists. There was no division in this age between science and art. And I think we still can learn a lot from this perspective. Now, we are going to Miguel Januari's contribution now as the voice of arts in this panel.
Hello. First of all, I want to thank the invitation and the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Fatima. And to have this time to share some of my thoughts with you. I am an artist from Porto, the city where I live and work. Currently, I'm a design doctorate at the Faculty of Fine Arts of the University of Porto, where I first graduated. I develop an artistic intervention project called Mais Menos, Plus Minus, that offers a critical reflection on the political, social, and economic organization model that manages contemporary urban societies. I've been creating thought-provoking work both indoors and outdoors under Mais Menos signature since 2005. And this project is also the focus of my ongoing academic research. But let's talk less about me and more about us and what brings us here. I bring a collective message, one made by a group of artists and people from the artistic field that share the same concerns and ideas, some of which, like myself, are also connected with the Academy. This is part of the result of the discussions we've been having, and I take this moment to share them with you. And since we talk about sharing, collectivity, and concerns, these are the perfect concepts that aggregate our thoughts. University and culture share many of these important aspects and walk hand by hand. Both are the perfect contexts to create solutions, either more functional or theoretical, or more creative or practical. There is a creative mind in every researcher and a researcher in every artist. They both work over the foundations of knowledge and experimentation. They are both born from curiosity and thinking, community and human connectivity. They both aim for a better understanding of life and society. They also share subjectivity and objectivity. Unfortunately, they also share concerns, not only in expected results in the fields of subjectivity, but being more objective, like the lack of investment and the due consideration regarding its role and importance in society. The challenges that we face and the questions that we bring here today require, first of all, and above everything else, acknowledgement of this fact and solutions to this ever-continuous problem. The unique pandemic situation we are living has proved and reinforced something that has been happening for many years now. That in a growing individualistic and profit-centered society, it's inversely proportional that the better the results and importance of science and the arts in society, the less they seem to be properly recognized, respected, and funded, unless they tend to play the game of the financial and entertainment system and corporate interests. Artists, technicians, academics, doctorates, researchers, in short, workers from university and culture, must demand recognition of their work and of their status as workers, and walk and struggle hand by hand against the tide of growing entertainment and mercantilization of society as a whole, and specifically of the academy and culture. Education and culture also play a central role in the support of healthy democracies. They are the spaces to proliferate critical thinking, debates, and for questioning our political, economic, and social models. Also, it's where our identity as society is fulfilled. The continuous democratization of these fields, with growing privatization and detachment from the public, not only create numb and passive citizens, but also weaken the fabric of democracy itself, exposing it to hazardous political and social outcomes that are growingly familiar to us. Educated populations create and demand solutions, and therefore the importance of connecting these fields with society as a whole, offering a public strategy and a communal and interconnected relation with people. The 21st century is already bringing social, political, economic, and ecological challenges. So, if we want answers to these problems and to fulfill the role of university and culture in a democratic society and in a collective future, we need to have public investments, the assurance of freedom, equity, and justice, which bring intangible profits to everyone, but not the economic ones that prove being harmful to human life and to nature. The answers to a promising and sustainable future for the next generations might be found on the university and culture. But to reach them, we need to have the will and the courage to face our current structural problems and to look into these fields as central and not secondary. With this said, I leave you with this video manifesto we, this group of artists, prepare for this summit. Thank you very much.
We, the artists, we work, we eat, we breathe, we mate and breed. We do stuff no one else does. We risk and try and fail and try again. We know we fail. And then, to prove we are right, we will fail again. We always do it again. We sleep, we wake up, we put you to bed, we wake you up. We give meaning to your lives. We give body to your soul. We give soul to your body. We give our lives to have meaning. We observe. We take notes. We communicate, we struggle, and we act. We deserve dignity. We want recognition. We want things to be fair. We want admission. We travel the world and spread because we are good swimmers. We give our bodies to the manifest. We need careers, more than wheels and mazes. We also need gloves and fancy instruments. We can write things down. We also quote and do speeches and give talks. We translate and navigate. We demand funding. We go on stage. We face the crowd. We look the critics in the eyes and they turn their faces down. We are not here for entertainment. We know the underground. We need a playground. We know places. We manipulate your faces. We are good jumpers. We are not products. We are not puppets. We are good trapezists. We see the future. We have been there. We are not alone. We are not alone. We are not just cages and straw beds and seeds to eat. We are more than red eyes and fluffy skin. We are worth more than 1%. We, the artists, sometimes we are mice, but very often we are artists.
Obrigado. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this unique contribution and bringing to the floor an argument in a different way of speaking and representing than we have been assisting by the other speakers. Thank you very much all for your contributions. I think they fit very well together and they complete each other. And if you allow, I would just add 2 or 3 thoughts, and then we might even try to exchange a bit on what has been said in the last hour. As you may know, we Germans have a special word to bring together science and the arts in the word of Bildung. This word which is education, culture, but also knowledge. And it has been quite a very strong word in the conception of the university in the beginning of the 19th century in Germany. And what we are assisting now is that this initial idea of Bildung is fading out of the universities to a certain technical professional training program instead of englobing all what education could mean, not only in terms of, as Angelos was saying, earnings for living, but learning to live. We, in the German tradition, we also have this unfortunate distinction that the science are good for explaining things and the humanities and the arts for understanding. And what we are trying to do here is actually to bring understanding and explaining together again. Some years ago, there was a very popular book published by a German author, translated into many languages under the title, oops, it doesn't really work, Bildung, so on culture. Soon enough after this, there was another book published, which is called The Other Bildung, the other formation. And what is the struggle here? The struggle is that also we in our presentation tend to evaluate a lot the contribution of the arts to the formation of younger people and to the interdisciplinary or hyperdisciplinary dialogue. But what we at the same time would have to assure is that people also understand all issues of technological change and technological questions that are driving our society today. when we were discussing recently at our Catholic University in Lisbon whether we should introduce more disciplines contempling culture and the arts in all transversal educational programs, someone rightly remembered that we should also introduce access to scientific knowledge to everyone at that point, for instance, by disciplines on such urgent matters like digital transformation, data science, and so on and so forth. So I think we actually, if we want to take this endeavor seriously, then we have actually to see the both sides as something which should come together. As Renato was saying in the very beginning, what is at stake is defending that the human being is not just one-dimensional. This idea of the multi-dimensional reality which we are exposed to and which we are living in, I think it's the main guiding idea behind it. As we see in many moments, there is a reductionism even in terms of what is valuable in society and what is not. And critical thinking is certainly always claiming that there should be more than just one dimension in the human being. And in this sense, as we are running quite an ambitious culture program at our Catholic University, I have to say that there is one thing that I always find very important in the work of art at universities. Being in an exhibition, being in a theater plays or whatever is giving at a certain moment. And we have many pieces or examples of public art in our university. And public art, it means art outside of the buildings where everyone has to pass by. And that is what allows for one of the most important effects that I wanted to stress of arts is to be disturbing, and simply to bring people to stop and to think and to be angry and to not understand and to run away or whatever disturbing can actually mean. And I think we should count on that as a necessary part of what arts are. They are not to make people immediately better or immediately more effective or immediately more successful. Arts are also there to remember us that there are many things that we do not understand. There are many things that represent a limit to us, and how we can actually face these limits by trying to find new answers. And this is, I think, the disturbing effect of arts, which is necessary to any critical thinking and any critical approach. So bringing this together under the term of Bildung in German history has not drawn to good results, as you know, and maybe we have to do better now, or as Miguel and his team would say, we should have to try again, fail, and as Beckett then said, fail again, and then fail better, and fail again. That's, I think, is certainly something to consider. Now, we have still some minutes left that you can react to each other, and I would very much like to invite you to do so. Please, any comment, question? Renato, please. You have,
just to put some comments. I was very glad to hear from you about a book by Dietrich Schwanitz. I think it's the name. It's interesting to see that it has been translated into Portuguese as Cultura Geral. So you see, Bildung is not a very easy way the word to translate. I think Romance languages can be rendered as formação, formación, formazione, formación. In English, it's quite difficult to render it, maybe as education, but it's a very rich name, a very rich word, and it takes a lot of things. And I completely agree with you that Bildung or education or formação is a very different thing from training. I don't like the idea that university will be a place to train people. You train people in the work market, for instance, when you enter an industry or an organization and so on, because there are many routines you must learn, but university is rather fitted to formar, to bilden, to educate people. The second point, it's about Miguel Januario's manifesto. It was very interesting to put the mice as heroes, because usually they are heroes in the cinema, and they are villains in our daily life. We are afraid of mice. And I just remembered some days ago in the London Review of Books, I was reading something about the cat and mouse law. It was passed by the UK Parliament 1 century ago, Miguel. And it was a law against the suffragettes, against women. Suffragettes would be jailed, and they would begin a strike. They would begin to stop eating and drinking. And when they would be on the verge of dying, they would be released. But the cat and mouse law authorized the government to re-jail them again, once they would be in good health. So they would accomplish the complete term of their conviction in pieces, let's say. So it's something very cruel, you see. And it is interesting to put this, to remember this after your manifesto. And about heroes and villains, I read a paper by Fatima the other day about Julius Caesar of Shakespeare. And it's very interesting to compare the two representations of Julius Caesar of Shakespeare by Orson Welles and by John Gielgud, maybe, I'm not very sure, the great actor John Gielgud, rendered as a dictator, a fascist, a Nazi dictator in the 30s, and as a more complex persona, maybe a hero in the 60s. And I think this duality is very interesting to be considered when we talk about humanity and so on. I'd like to comment a little more about everything. It was very interesting to hear Paula speak about the interdisciplinarity, strong interdisciplinarity, to hear Pedro talk about the links between arts and science and so on. But I think I have already monopolized too long a time. I was very glad to be here and to hear you, to hear all of you. Thank you very much.
Paula.
Yeah, may I say something? I would like to, say something about failing and failing better. I like that, failing better. Well, what I've talked about, of course, is all the good sides and all the good things that we do with our PhD. But I would also like to say something about what is more difficult. So it's not rare that when the members of the scientific board have to collaborate, because we organize teaching activities in which very different people from very different backgrounds come together and have to talk about the same topic from very different perspectives. And it's not rare that at some point someone comes up saying, oh, but you see, it's very difficult for me to talk to non-specialists. So it is as if there were a sort of in a competition whereby each of us declares that it is very difficult for them, more difficult for any other to bridge their disciplines, you see. So to be able to talk to non-experts, it's very difficult for me, particularly difficult for me, which means that there's work to do, and it's a long way, just that, it's a long way, because even among ourselves, even when we talk, we are very good examples of people that can talk to each other. But I'm sure that we have internalized certain stereotypes, certain patterns of thought, certain biases. And I think that we have to start from ourselves. And this is something we've discussed with Fatima a lot. We can certainly invest in young minds, but we have to start from ourselves. Thank you.
As you see, we could continue debating this for quite a long time. So we have to go back to Bertolt Brecht to come around with this duration by saying the curtain falls and all questions are open, and that's good. In this sense, it was a pleasure to be here, and we stay together tomorrow in the continuing of these debates. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Peter, allow me just to jump in, just to thank each and every one of you who contributed to this very stimulating panel. And to say, well, this is the end of day one, but we'll be back tomorrow, 9 o'clock sharp. And please remember, it's GMT, so Greenwich Mean Time. We still have 4 panels to go. We have 1 conversation with the mayor of the city of Porto. And of course, we have Jane Pickering's keynote lecture and plenty of cultural breaks. I hope that we're enjoying our cultural breaks as well. So I hope that we'll be able to have you tomorrow as well. And please remember that in case you missed any part of the program, you can revisit it, or you can just see it for the first time on YouTube. Well, thank you very much. See you tomorrow.